and welcome to another episode of Geekoutdoors.com. And as you could probably see, I finally did it. I got myself an Apple iOS product. No, not really. Just kidding. Um, it's not. It's it's still Android. But it is something that I really wanted to talk about for all the fanboys and fangirls out there. And I'm gonna try to keep it as civil as possible. So let's keep with this theme because honestly, Apple's products have always been really simple, clean, and easy to use. Despite that, I do want to talk about the ongoing, never-ending battle between Apple versus iOS, but in the year 2016. So let's get into this. Let's start talking about what it is that causes so much emotion between the two, and mainly just my opinions on what I think it's all about, and then what my thoughts are on each particular platform. So let's start off with Android right here, and right here I'm at the main website of Android, and in 2016, if you just start off with their website, and let me just go through this real quick. Here you see phones. You see wearables, phones, tablets, TVs, and cars. Okay, and that looks oddly like an iWatch commercial. But the reason I want to show Android's website is in 2016, I want to show you the difference between that and then the Apple website. So if you look at the Apple website, they have phones. Um, well, they have their laptops, but they have tablets, and then they'll also have wearables. And there should also be an Apple TV here somewhere. Sometimes there's an Apple TV, but you get the idea. They're more and more they're becoming more similar than they were different. If you look back to whenever Android and the Apple iPhones first came out, they were extremely different. And for the theme of 2016, in my opinion, I think they're going to become more alike than they are different. And what I mean by that is not only from the software standpoint, but also they're basically their overall big plans. Okay, I mean even their strategies, they're very very similar. So let's start off with the actual software itself. Okay, so I'm gonna get a little geeky here, and so I'm gonna give you my rendition of how these platforms actually look underneath, the whole technical part of it. So let's get out of here real quick, and I'm gonna do my best drawing. And so basically, both of these both of these platforms, they're pretty much they're built the same. Okay, and I'm really simplifying this. So um, both of the platforms, they're built in around a framework. Okay, so here we have apps. Okay, and then below that we have here, this is their primarily their programming layer, um, and also yeah, my handwriting's bad, media libraries and so forth. And sometimes they just call this the middleware. And then they have their OS layer, okay, or operating system. So in a nutshell, how it works is, let's go with Android real quick. Their OS layer is Linux. It's a Linux kernel, and your operating system is basically what controls all your low-level stuff. So that is your power management, your memory management, your resource management, communicating with your actual hardware like the CPU and so forth. And like I said, for Android, it's going to be the Linux kernel, and then for Apple's iOS, it's going to be the Mac OS kernel. Okay, this is the very lowest layer. This is the main base of all your whole platform, and whenever people are usually talking about Android or iOS, they're talking about it as one whole operating system, which technically is not the case. It's a whole platform. Okay, and then you move up to the second layer, and sometimes this is referred to as the middleware layer. So this is the part in between this top layer, which is your application, and then your bottom layer, which is your operating system. So this part in the middle is all communication part. Okay, so at least for Android, this is the area where you're going to have all your programming libraries, your C, C++ libraries for stuff like your graphics, like OpenGL, or your Wi-Fi, networking, all that stuff, security. It's all there. And Apple is works in a very similar way. All the main libraries for your networking, security, and so forth is there as well. Um, and Android also has another thing. It's called the DVM. It's the Dalvik Virtual Machine. So that's the part that converts the programming language into assembly language for the OS. Okay, so I mean, I'm sorry, for the actual hardware. Um, so the top layer is your application layer. Okay. Now, in the Android world, the majority or pretty much all your applications, they're built around Java. Java is a open source operating system, so it's built around the whole Java platform. And when Android first came out, it was Java, C, C++, and I think you could also program in .NET. But now it's in Java. Okay. And for iOS, their primary platform was just Object-C and C, but now they have a new programming language called Swift. And so, in a nutshell, the in the bottom layer, I mean, below everything else, they're very, very similar, even from the beginning. Okay, and so I just want to show you that part from a very geeky software standpoint. Erase that. Okay, so let's get back to the actual talk about the differences between the two. So as I just showed you, like the bottom layer, it's very very similar. Okay, and then in 2016, even the way they look, they're becoming more alike than they are different. Okay, and in my opinion, Apple, at least their software, their user interface, their usability is becoming more like Android, and Android is becoming more like iOS. Okay, and so let me explain. Like for let's just start off with for Apple. Okay, for Apple's iOS, in the recent year and up until this point, we've been seeing more features. For example, uh, you have like your notification window, your toggle, which you could bring down, whereas before Apple didn't even have that. Okay, and they also added functionality to that area too as well. Kind of like widgets, but it's in your notification area. Okay, and then also Apple's been slowly adding additional features. They're not limiting things so much as they were before. You do have the option on your iPads to do split screen now, and I know that's available for their Mac OS, but in their mobile operating system, that's a first. But that's something that's been available in Android for a while, although not natively. Okay, so that's one thing. So Apple is slowly but surely they're adding more features to the iOS operating system. Okay, so that's where Apple is becoming more like Android, where Android has always been known to have a lot of features. Now, when we get to Android, and they're going kind of like in the opposite direction. Okay, instead of adding more features, they're more focused on refining and reducing features, as a matter of fact. Okay, case in point, with their new material design UI, it is very minimalistic. Um, and more simplified. Okay, and so that's something that Apple is basically been known for. It's very powerful, but it's very simple. um, and in some cases that's good, but in some other cases, they're reducing some functionality. There's been rumors that Android might get to the point where they will not have an app drawer anymore, which would really really suck. And also, it's not just the software features either. In terms of hardware, if you look at the Nexus phones, ever since the Nexus first came out, they never had a micro SD card slot. And that's a feature that, I myself love, and that's one that really differentiates itself from Apple products from the very beginning, at least for their phones, because, it allows you to increase your storage without having to pay so much money to expand it like you would with an iPhone. So that's another thing. And also, like before, your Android phones would have so many features. Not only would you be able to root your phone easily, add so many different type of launchers, customize it really thoroughly? Um, but you basically own your devices. Nowadays Android, I mean, for the most part, it's still like that, but more and more it's becoming less like that. If you buy any of these manufactured phones, like from LG, Samsung, especially Samsung, they'll lock down the bootloaders. You can't go in and put in a new version of Android or flash it like you could back in the day. Which once again is taking more of that flexibility and customization away. And also, with Android now, it seems like more and more Google is, making it more restrictive they're having more control over what happens in Android. In some cases that's good, like their Play Store, for them to have more control over that. It'll keep, bad apps and apps that might hurt, consumers out, which is good. But in another case, it becomes I could easily seeing it become more controlled, and you'll have less, people or companies coming in with different ideas because there'll be so much more control. And also, if you wanted to have Android services, for the OEMs on your phones automatically, you have to have meet certain requirements before you could do that. So that's what I mean by, Apple is becoming more like Android, and Android is becoming more like Apple. So in a nutshell, Apple is adding more features, and Android, as it seems like right now, they're reducing features. So I think I don't think that's a a great trend for Android. I think they need to keep refining and not reduce features. Okay, so that's first and foremost. We talked a lot about the similarities of how they're built underneath, but there's also some parallel between kind of where they're heading. Okay, they're becoming more like each other than they are not. Okay, let's get to the part where we talk about the actual hardware. Now, when it comes to Apple in 2016, there actually have more options available now, in terms of what you could buy. Now, this is nowhere near the sheer amount of, I guess, choices that you would get in Android, but it is way different than what it was when the iPhone was, out even a few years ago when you could really only choose one iPhone. Now you have the option of the iPhone 6s, 6, SE, and for their tablets, you have iPad, Pro, pretty much 13-inch. They're 9.7, and then before you had their Air 1, 2 as well. So Apple is expanding, and the iPhone SE, it's really a big thing for them. Even though it's not really innovative in terms of looks, but this is Apple getting into the mid and then eventually lower end markets because they know Android is having a lot of success in that area. And speaking of that, um, that is the big difference in Android in 2016. You're having these, most of them are Chinese companies, but you're having these companies produce some absolutely spectacular phones for the price. Okay, so it's not going away neither. Companies like Huawei, Meizu right here, and then you have Xiaomi, right? That is that's the same company. Uh, I'm sorry, no, it's not. So here's Meizu. So you have a lot of these up and coming companies who are really not only going for Android itself in terms of all the other Android competitors like Samsung, LG, the countless many others, but also Apple, like like Meizu right here, they really copied a lot of the iPhone look and even down to the software. Okay, so it's very similar to an Apple like experience. Okay, so not only is these new uh, mid-tier to lower tier Android manufacturers affecting other Android manufacturers, it's also affecting Apple because the US is a big market, but there's other countries out there, and countries like China and India, they're just huge, and most of the people there are not, they're not buying top tier stuff because people in those countries, they can't afford to spend $1,000 on a phone. The economies are a lot different there. So in those countries, you're probably going to be more successful if you're selling mid-tier to lower-tier phones. So that's why you're having, this influx of, these mid to lower-tier phones, but they're very high quality. And that's actually where I think there's going to be a big change in 2016, where more and more Android as a whole and heading towards this, mid and lower tier more and more. They're going to be focusing their attention in those areas. So that's one thing that I definitely see between the two. Um, and it's more pressure, I think, for Apple than it is for Android because, there's not one Android maker. Okay, that's for sure. So yeah, so out of all these products and stuff, in my opinion, I still think, and I might get a lot of hate on this because I do love Android, but I still think for an all-around best phone, when it comes down to it, it's still gonna have to be the iPhone. I mean, 6S. I'm sorry. I mean, I love the specs on Android and everything else, all the customization. But if you're looking at the overall experience of it all, I mean, for the majority of people, and not really just a geek niche, it's still going to be the iPhones. Okay, that's all around. But with Android, they're looking to create that very similar, very same experience. And Android is doing that, or is trying to do that with their Nexus program. So I could really see in the future, and I think this has always been Google's game plan. Android is open source, so they allow pretty much anybody to, make a version of Android if they wanted to, and if they want Google services on it, they're gonna have to, like I said, meet Google's requirements. But I really think eventually, Google is gonna knock everybody out, and they're gonna try to become, or they've been going towards becoming the very next Apple. So and they're already testing this out right now with their Nexus program. So once again, these companies are becoming more similar than they are different, and that is pretty much my whole point of this particular episode of Android versus iOS in 2016. There's always going to be that particular battle. I don't think that that's ever going to go away. But if you really look at really what's going on, they're really not battling each other. If anything, they're just becoming more alike each other. They're taking ideas from each other. And so yeah, we'll see how that goes. I really hope that there's another strong competitor that comes out. And I'm not counting Windows phones because, to be honest, they're just not great at all. I'm hoping there's another Linux-based alternative. The Ubuntu OS phones that kind of have came out, but not really. But I hope there's another third stronger one because if there's just these two, as much as Google is touting the open source nature of Android, at some point, there's always a business motive behind it. I understand, even if you're open source, you do need to make money, but at some point, it's going to be more like Apple, and more like just about, but the bottom line, okay? And so, without another strong player, I think a third player would really help. These companies, once again, they might monopolize things and, might get lazy, and so you're kind of forced to use either one, either or. So hopefully there'll be a third option, in 2016, if it's not the Ubuntu OS, it might be the Jellyfish OS, and who knows, Microsoft might do something amazing. So we'll see. So that's pretty much this episode. If you had any ideas or thoughts on this ongoing Apple versus iOS battle, please leave your comments below. And if not, then what are you using? Do you even have a phone? Because really, you pretty much have. Thanks for checking out this episode. And as always, if you like these videos, be sure to click on the subscribe button. And for full written content, audio content, and additional geek stuff, head over to geekoutdoors.com, and I'll see you outdoors on the very next episode.